Okay, today we're going to be looking at the scanner and the random class. This is a continuation of our topic from last time, which was reference variables and objects. We saw last time our first example of a reference variable, which was the string class. So we looked at how do you create a string variable. We looked at the new keyword. We looked at constructors, what is an object, all of that good stuff. And then we looked at the dot operator and how that lets us access and call methods inside the string class. So we're basically going to follow that exact same path, but this time we're going to be looking at scanner and random. And together, string, scanner, and random, they allow us to write much more interesting and complex and interactive programs. Okay, let's start with the scanner class. So what is a scanner object? So a scanner object lets you read input from a given input source. That input source may be the keyboard. The input source may be a file. The input source could be a string, right? So there's different input sources. For us, we're really going to focus on using the keyboard. Okay? To create a scanner object, I'm showing that here. So the syntax for creating a scanner object is very similar to the syntax for creating a string object. On the left-hand side here, we just have a variable declaration. There's nothing fancy going on. Note the variable name scan. I'm just using that to line up with your book. There's nothing magical about that name. You could call it input. You could call it keyboard. You could call it input source, whatever. There's nothing really magical about the name scan. Okay, so on the left-hand side here, I'm creating a variable. On the right-hand side, this is where reference variables differ from primitive. So the new keyword requests memory from your computer. Once it gets that raw memory, this method here, the constructor, is called. The constructor has one purpose in life, that's to take the raw memory and initialize it or instantiate an object. So each constructor is different. I'm kind of, highlighting the input here. Whenever you create a new object, you have to look at the documentation for that class to figure out what does a constructor take as input. For the string class, we saw that we passed in an actual string. For the scanner class, we are passing in system.in. That is how you designate the keyboard as your input source. Okay, so in Java, system.out is the console, system.in is the keyboard. So what I'm saying is create a new scanner object that is going to read from system.in. It's going to read from the keyboard. Once we have our scanner object, then we'll use the dot operator to call the methods that exist in the scanner class, and that's really what allows us to do cool things, I guess. We'll leave it at that. Okay, so we're going to jump over to BlueJ and look at some code for how we might use a scanner. Before we do that, though, I want to spend like 30 seconds just talking about how the scanner or the computer views what you type at the keyboard versus how you, a human, view what you typed at the keyboard. So if I asked you to type a phrase like, today is a good day, okay, and you sat down at a keyboard and you typed it, and I asked you, what did you just type? You would tell me, I just typed, today is a good day, right? That is a very human response. If I asked the computer what was just typed, the computer would say, capital TODAY space IS space A space GOOD space DAY, enter. To the computer, there's no differentiation between white space and characters, right? They're all kind of first-class citizens. To us as humans, we almost don't even think about it. I mean, we just don't think. We don't think about spaces. When you hit enter at the end, we don't think about that. It's purely utilitarian. But when you use a scanner, you have to start accounting for and thinking about the white space. Otherwise, your program's going to get wacky and it's going to get out of sync. So the way that a scanner works, a scanner will scan past white space. So it does ignore the white space. It will kind of, kick out all the white space until it finds a word or a token. It will then read that word or that token and give it back to you. Okay, and we're going to see an example of a program that has a bug in it. And the bug is because I did not carefully think about how the scanner is ignoring or not ignoring white space. Okay, so my program hopefully should not work, and we'll hopefully learn a lesson from that. Okay, so here's some code that I wrote that illustrates some of the methods inside the scanner class. I've created a scanner here, and then I'm printing out enter your first and last name. It's almost always a good idea. In fact, it is always a good idea to print first to tell people that they should be typing something. If you don't have a print statement, then the user of your program is going to sit there not knowing that they should type something, and your code is going to wait until they type something. And it can give the illusion that your code is just running endlessly and nothing's happening. So first thing I'm going to do is tell the user, please enter your first and last name. Okay, here we see the next method. This is the first method that we're going to look at in the scanner class. I'm saying scan, which is the address of our object. Then I have the dot operator, which allows me to access methods inside that object. And then I have next, which is the method I want to call. Okay, what does the next method do? The next method will skip white space and it will return the next token it finds. Okay, it skips white space and it returns the next token that it finds. Okay, going back to our example, the scanner is going to begin at the beginning. Okay, if we call next, there's no white space to skip. It immediately finds a token. It will read that token and return it back. And then the scanner is waiting right after the first token. It's waiting here for you to pick up. So it is waiting for you to call next again. Okay, so basically the scanner starts reading where you left off last time. Okay, so the first time we say scan.next, it's going to read in today. It's going to return that back to us and it's going to wait. The next time we call scan, it's going to scan past the white space and ignore it until it finds a token. It will read the token is and return it back to us. If we were to call next again, it would scan past the white space and ignore it until it reaches the next token. It would read the token A and it would return it back. Okay, it's going to do that for good and it's going to do that for day. Notice though that it's not going to read this enter here, right? I got today is a good day. As far as I, the human, am concerned, I've read everything I wanted to read, right? I got all the words, that's all I care about. And that's going to be a problem. Okay, so here I'm calling scan.next. That's going to scan the first name. The return value is a string. Thus, I must store it in a string local variable. Okay, so the left-hand side type and the right-hand side return value type must match. Next gives me back a string. Thus, I will store it in a string local variable. Okay, that's the first name. I'm going to call scan.next again. That's going to skip all the spaces. It's probably only one space until it finds the last name. It will scan in the last name and it will store it in this local variable. Notice that what is left behind is the enter. Okay, that's something we as humans don't tend to think about, but it is there. Okay, then I'm going to say enter your mailing address. This is the next method in the scanner class we're going to look at, which is next line. Whereas the next method reads one token at a time, the next line method reads the entire line, including the enter, and then it moves to the next line. Okay, so ideally the person would type their mailing address, 111 Smith Street, White Street, whatever. We would read that entire line in, and I'm going to store it in the local variable address. And then I say enter your age. Here's the next int method. So this skips white space until it finds an integer, and then it reads that in. The return value here is not a string, it's an integer, and so that's why I'm storing it in an integer local variable. Okay, so this program should say, enter your first and last name. We type our name. Then it should say, enter your mailing address. We type our mailing address. And then enter your age. We type our age. Okay, so let's see if that is what happens. Okay, enter your first and last name. Bob Johnson. This blue here is BlueJ displaying for you what you just typed. We didn't print that out. That's not my print statement. Okay, enter your mailing address. And then it did not stop to give me a chance to enter my mailing address, which is just rude. And then it says enter your age, 15, enter. Okay, so let's do that one more time so you can see what's going on. Enter your first and last name, Bob Johnson. Okay, enter your mailing address. It doesn't pause. I'm not able to type anything. And then it says enter your age, 22, enter. Okay, what has gone wrong? What has gone wrong is we did not take into account this enter here. Okay, so let's go back. This scan.next, let's write this out. Bob Johnson. Enter. Oop. Okay, so the first scan.next is going to read in Bob. It will then store that in the variable first name. The next call to scan.next is going to skip past the white space, and it's going to read in the name Johnson. Okay, so that is correctly stored in the variable last name. We then say enter your mailing address, and we call scan.nextLine. Scan.nextLine is not going to wait for someone to type their mailing address because there's still something left behind. That something is here. So scan.nextLine is going to say, oh, there's already stuff there. Wonderful. It's going to scan this enter. Okay. We will find that what is stored in this address variable is the empty string. There's nothing stored there. So that's why we see enter your mailing address. And then instead of waiting, it immediately scans the enter and then prints enter your age. And then it waits for us to type an int. Okay. So all of this, and the reason I'm kind of belaboring this point is because your homework assignment uses string scanner and random to do usernames and passwords. And this is kind of a common place where students get lost and they're not sure why. Like, I asked them to enter this and it's not waiting and it just gets really confusing. This is why. So that's kind of why I'm belaboring this. Basically, I'm going to say scan.nextLine. This is going to pick up that stray enter. I don't want to leave it behind. Scan the first name, scan the last name, and then get rid of that enter that's left behind. Okay, this way we're not getting out of sync between our print statements and our scan statements. All right, let's run it one more time. Hopefully this works. Okay, enter your first and last name, Bob Johnson. There we go. Enter your mailing address, 1111 White Street. Enter your age, 86. There we go. Okay, so that is how we expect the program to work. Okay, whatever. All of that, take it, leave it, it is what it is. Okay, you can see this code posted. I put in copious comments for you here, trying to explain everything that's happening, everything from just rules of thumb you might want to print before you call a scan method. These are the different methods. Next reads a single token. Next line reads the entire line, including the enter. Next int reads an integer. There was one other thing I wanted to say. Oh yes, the same problem that happens with scan.next also happens with nextInt. Okay, so the nextInt method does not consume the white space after the number. So it will skip all the spaces up to the number. It will read the number. It will give you the number, but it will leave behind any white space after the number. So you may have to say scan.nextLine again to read or to consume any stray enter that is left behind. So just a heads up. Okay, that is the scanner class. I wanted to do maybe a program together. So here's our tip calculator. This is where we ask the user how much their food cost and how much they'd like to tip. And I wanted to maybe code this together interactively. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is to create a scanner. Okay, so that's that. And then the next thing is, again, printing out and asking the user to enter some information. So system.out.println. Please enter the cost of your meal. Now here, the cost of the meal is probably going to be a double. Food cost. Just like there's a next int method, there is a next double method. So we're going to call next double. Next, let's ask them to enter the tip cost. Now, because there's lots of ways someone could enter a tip amount, I'm going to provide an example. Okay, so for example, 0.5 or 0.2. Okay. This is good just from a basic user interaction design standpoint. Anytime there's ambiguity about what a human could enter into your program, better to be very explicit and to give them an example. Here I'm telling them, I want you to enter a decimal. It should be less than 1, unless you're incredibly, incredibly generous. So I'm saying, please enter the tip amount, for example, 0.15 or 0.20. Okay, so let's grab that. So double tip equals scan.next double. Now that we have the information we need, let's go ahead and compute the total cost. Or so let's do the tip amount. That's going to be the food cost times the tip percent. Then we can compute the total cost of the meal, which is going to be the food cost plus the tip amount. And then we can print that back out. Okay, I'm going to print out what the user typed just for verification so they can see that we correctly read in their information. Okay, so we'll print out the food cost, we'll print out the tip percent, and we'll then print out the final cost of their meal. Okay, so let's compile this, run it. Please enter the cost of your meal, so $20.50. Please enter the tip amount, 0.20, and there we go. So if your food was $20.50 and you want to tip 20%, then the total is $24.60. Now, this is a side note. It's not important because this is a quick example. This is not the prettiest, most well-formatted printing, which annoys me a little bit, but honestly, it doesn't matter. But really quickly, because I just want to add a space here. It'd also be nice to start putting some dollar amounts in here. Just make things look a little bit nicer. That's a little bit better. A little bit, okay. It doesn't matter. Done is better than perfect, okay. Okay, coming back. Before we move on to random class, there are a few things I want to note beyond what I already noted. 1, you do need to import scanner. You saw me do that, don't forget. 2, you only need 1 scanner object. Sometimes I will have students who create 1 scanner for each piece of information they want to read in. You don't need to do that. Create 1 scanner object, and then you can use that scanner object again and again by calling next, next in, next double, next line, whatever. Last but not least, differentiate in your mind between the scanner object and the string it is returning. Scan is a scanner. It's an object. It is not a string. Sometimes what I'll have students do is I'll see them do this. they will create a scanner object and they might call it first name. Scanner first name equals new scanner. Right there, the fact that you called this scanner first name tells me that you're misunderstanding, that you think that this object is the string itself, that it is the first name. It's not. It has methods that will return the first name. It has methods that will return a string, but it is not itself a string. So try to differentiate these two types. It is a scanner that has methods. Those methods allow you to read strings that humans type at the keyboard, and try and keep those separate. Okay, last but not least is the random class. So what is a random object? So a random object is an object that will generate pseudo-random numbers for you. Your book talks about pseudo-random numbers. They're called pseudo-random because in Java and many programming languages, when you need a random number, so you request a random number, the random number that you're getting isn't truly random. Instead, there are equations, kind of these complicated mathematical equations that you can use to churn out a sequence of numbers, and that sequence of numbers looks random, okay? So the distribution of that sequence of numbers appears to be random, but it's not random because if you knew the equation, you could just generate the same sequence of numbers, like you know what's gonna come next. So these are called pseudo-random. They appear to be random, but in fact they are deterministic. I just take an equation and I churn out numbers from this equation. Now, for your next homework assignment, you will in fact be implementing one of these equations. So you will be, oh wait, stop, let me think. No, you have already, it's funny because I'm making these videos and our class hasn't even started yet, for the methods homework assignment. So for that, you had to implement an equation that generated pseudo-random numbers, although our equation was really weak sauce and the random numbers were totally not random, but whatever. So the random class is much more sophisticated than what you did for your homework assignment, and it's a way for you to get random integers, random doubles, so on and so forth. How do you create a random object? You create a random object in the same way that you create any other object. On the left-hand side here, we have a variable declaration. RNG is the typical name. It stands for random number generator. On the right-hand side, the new keyword request memory. The constructor is called. Notice this constructor doesn't take anything. This is our first example where the constructor does not need an input. Once you have a random object, how do you use it? So here I'm showing some of the methods. We're really only going to basically focus on the next int method. This is a way to get random integers. There are other methods, but this is primarily what we'll be using. Okay, so here I've created a random object. I'm then using the dot operator to call the next int method. If you provide nothing to this method, then it's going to give you a random integer. Now, integers can store values between -2 billion and 2 billion. It will literally give you a random integer between -2 billion and 2 billion. So think carefully if that's what you want. Okay, the return value here is an integer. Thus, I'm storing it in an integer local variable, and then I'm going to print it out. Here's me calling the next int method, and now I am passing in an input. I'm passing in a number, and that number is 7. So, very important. The next int method returns a random integer in the range from 0 to upper bound -1. Okay. So if you call the next int method and you pass in a number like 7, the meaning of that number is it's an upper bound. What is going to be returned back to you is a random number between 0 and 1 minus that upper bound. So in our case, if we pass in 7, it's going to give us a random integer between 0 and 6. Okay, so that's important. Now, sometimes we don't want a random number that starts at 0. I don't want something between 0 and 6. Maybe I want something between 1 and 7. Okay, so in that case, what you can do is you can call nextInt, pass in your upper bound, and then whatever number it gives you, you can add an offset to it. And that's what I'm showing here. So I'm calling nextInt, passing in 7. That will get me something between 0 and 6. Whatever it returns to me, I'm going to add 1. By adding 1, which is our offset, the effect is it's shifting that entire range, 0, 6, up by 1 to 1, 7. Okay, so this line of code is going to give me a random number between 1 and 7. Okay. Last but not least, here I'm generating a random 5-digit number. Okay, so it's going to give me a number between 0 and 1 minus 90,000, so 89,999. Okay, so that's what's going to be returned. Now, once a number is returned to me, I'm going to add an offset. So I'm going to add 10,000. So we're going to add 10,000 to whatever is given to us. Okay, if the number 0 is returned and we add 10,000 to it, right, that will give us the number 10,000. If the upper bound, if 89,999 is returned and we add 10,000 to it, that will give us 99,999. Okay. So now if we look at the sequence of random numbers, it's something between 10,000 and 99,999. Basically, it's some random 5-digit integer. Okay. So if we run this program repeatedly, we'll see that each time it gives us something different. Okay, so here's the first one where we didn't specify a range. You just get what you get. The second one is some random number between 1 and 7. And the last one is a random 5-digit number. Okay, so let's keep running this a few times. Okay, so each time we run it, right, we're getting some random value. Okay. Okay, last but not least, the same as the scanner class, there are just some things I want to note, which is you do have to import random as well. That is up here at the top, import java.util.random. So it's important to keep that in mind. You only need one random object. Again, you don't need to create one object for each random number you want to generate. Create one object and use it multiple times. And last but not least, RNG. So this variable here, it's not a number. It is a random object. Okay, so again, try to differentiate between those two types in your head. It's a random object that has methods that will give you numbers, but it itself is not a number. Okay, let's do some quick recap. So scanner objects allow you to read in. This is how you create them. You do need to think about the white space and the enter at the end. Hopefully that made sense. Here are some of the notes, warnings, things to keep in mind. The random class will give you a random object will give you a sequence of pseudorandom numbers. Again, here's how you would create such an object and basically the same warnings to keep in mind. Looking at our code here, a quick recap. The next int, next double, although they will ignore white space up to the token or up to the number, they're not going to ignore or consume white space after the token or after the number. So when you're doing your homework assignment, if you're running it and things are getting out of sync, so like you say, please enter your mailing address, and it's not even waiting, it's already reading something and moving on, it basically means you have a straight enter somewhere that you didn't pick up. And the solution to that is to enter scan.nextLine. That's going to read the enter and trash it. And that way, the next time you call whatever, next line, next line, whatever, you're kind of starting fresh. You're starting on the new line. And then last but not least, for random, Whatever number you pass in, you're going to get from 0 to 1 minus that number. Given that range, you can then add an offset to kind of move that range around to get what you want. Okay, so if we wanted a number between 1 and 7, we'd say next in 7. That's going to give you from 0 to 6. Okay, so you have to remember afterwards you need to add 1 to shift that range up. Okay, if I wanted a number between 1 and 365, I could call next int 365. That's going to give me a random number between 0 and 364. And then I have to add an offset of 1, right, to get me the range I really want. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. All of these are just things from the homework assignment that I know could be problematic. So I'm just kind of trying to help people out now. Okay, that's basically it. All this code should be posted on the course webpage, so you can kind of look at it in more depth. And I also really encourage you to just start writing your own code. Now that you know string, scanner, and random, you really can start writing really interesting programs. And the more that you experiment with these classes on your own, the more comfortable you're going to be. So highly recommend, if you've got some free time, write some fun programs, show them to your friends, your parents, and then you get some free practice as well. Okay, that is that, and we're done.